Here, wait, let's just try and do this.
We should have a live mic.
Okay.
Yeah. Go ahead, you can project.
I'll repeat the question.
Do you think, have you tried including some like a band like Gorillas? Because they can't not Vocaloid, but you do a concert where there's no people there. This picture.
Right. So the question was about Gorillaz, who is this band, an American band, I'm pretty sure, who was extremely popular in the mid-2000s because they purported themselves to be fake characters, so they kind of did all their music videos as cartoons. And they actually did a concert, which was like the Hatsune Miku concert, where they projected themselves on stage instead of actually appearing. And I've never really considered them an equal to Vocaloid, just because I'm really interested in the pure production aspects and not so much how they're presenting themselves. It's entirely interesting to look at Vocaloid from the perspective of how is this influencing how we perceive characters, how people influence the production of a character. Even really, you can look at it from a feminist perspective and saying, how are they influencing ideas of gender in this space? But that's not necessarily what I'm looking at, because I'm really coming at it from a sociological and anthropological perspective.
Well, Gorillaz is not one band. It's actually about, he's for 20 different groups.
Okay, next question. Right back there.
So I...
Oh, behind you.
Oh, we have a mic. But, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Right there.
Let's see. Okay, thanks. The question was, it sounds like you're going to do some research into what makes certain characters, I guess you would call them, popular. And one thing that I didn't see listed here, or maybe I missed it, was the psychology of how they look and how they sound. And I was wondering if you're doing any research into that aspect and how it ties into popularity.
Yeah, totally. So there's actually, I didn't really get to go into any of the stuff I'm reading in my literature review. I just kind of went over the topics. But there's a whole swath of literature, specifically Japanese stuff, that looks at the development of characters. Man, the names are escaping me now. But actually, it's very interesting. A very popular manga artist, whose name also escapes me at the moment, just published a book about the development of pure production characters in Japan. And he specifically uses Vocaloid as one of those examples. So yeah, there is a lot of literature that I have been looking at in that regard.
Okay, next question. Let's spread it around the room, so right back there.
So yeah, let me just first say, I think it's awesome that you're talking about free software and open source, especially at an anime convention, which I don't expect actually, unfortunately, because I do think there should be some, I guess, crossovers between like the anime fandom and open source advocates. I'm actually wearing I don't know if you've heard of like a hackerspace before. I'm actually wearing the t-shirt for San Francisco Hackerspace called Norrisbridge. Cool. So I'm totally.
We should talk afterwards.
Oh yeah, totally. So actually, my question is, I know you went over sort of Vocaloid, and actually it's interesting you went over how the software is proprietary and stuff. I don't know, how do you feel about basically the use of proprietary software in fan subbing groups?
Oh, that's an interesting question. That really diverges, I think, from what I'm researching.
Right.
At the same time, though, the fact that fan subbing is technically illegal kind of negates any kind of argument that you would try and make about that. But academia is all about discourse and conversation, so let's try and tackle that question. I feel like the use of technology, this is kind of my personal opinion, the use of technology does not matter of what you're using. As long as, I'm an agent, or I'm an advocate of agency for people. The ability to do what you like with what you have. I fully support that, and I would like to support that more in academic discourse. And there's, Tarleton Gillespie, who I mentioned before, a lot of his research focuses specifically on how technology is mediated so that people can't use things like DRM and stuff like that. And so for fan subbing groups, yeah, if they're using proprietary technology, it doesn't matter. The fans are not necessarily going to see or probably, but most likely not see what they're using. They're just
Right,
going to be facing a product in the end. But yeah, we should totally talk more after this because I feel like I'm kind of blabbering on, and we can ask more
We
questions.
probably have time for 2 more questions, so right back there.
Hey, thank you. I'm out of the loop, so I was actually curious what this little blueberry girl was all about.
Could you actually just speak into the mic a bit more?
Yeah, sorry, I was just saying it. I didn't know a ton about her, so it was great to find that out. But well, I'm curious if you mentioned in the beginning, like Gibson retweeted this, and there's a long tradition in the sort of cyberpunk and sci-fi dystopia of the virtual idol, right, or the virtual singer, particularly Idol from Gibson and Macross Plus and these kind of things. So one of the things I'm curious about, has there been any pushback, not necessarily from the stuffy people who always are afraid of new technology, but from fans or sci-fi fans or people sort of within the community at the idea of virtual idol?
I feel like there's a specific tendency to like this kind of media. So like there has been a lot, actually, so here's an anecdote. One of my friends talked to the video game orchestra, which is based at Berkeley in Boston, where I'm originally from. And he talked to the director of the program there, and he said that Vocaloid is a joke. Like, this is just a fad that's gonna die out. And this whole virtual idol thing is just kind of gonna fade away. I feel like it's really hard for me to answer that question because I'm not very knowledgeable in sci-fi. But I feel like the fact that this is so disruptive in terms of our general sense of what music can be, that's part of why it has become so popular. And the fact that William Gibson tweeted out like, oh, this is amazing, but at the same time, I wish it were a bit more human, like that book I wrote about it, means that there's still some kind of like hesitancy to accept this as something that can continue in the long run. Even though, like if you go talk to the Krypton guys, they're all for seeing this as a global movement and seeing this as something that can be maintained over the long term. So there are obvious issues, and the fact that this is so young means that it's really difficult to answer those questions now. But hopefully my research will try and like evoke some of those answers in the end.
And let me actually grab that. I've got one question for you. Okay. I'll use my privilege as the organizer of this to throw one question out. Definitely in the Western fandom and in Western transmedia fandom, there have been many examples of pushback against attempts to commercialize fandom. Do you see something like that happening with Vocaloid, or has there been any trend of pushback against commercialization on this?
From what I can tell, no, because it seems for the most part that fans are really appreciative that it's becoming so big. And it really depends on what fans you're talking about. So like, whenever I say the word Vocaloid, that's very, it's very vague and nondescript because when there are so many Vocaloid software out there. So you could say Vocaloid and it might be Tonio, who is like this male opera singer. And there might be like 2 fans of that guy versus the millions of fans of Hatsune Miku. But I think fans are definitely appreciative of the fact that even though a lot of the producers might not be making so much money and Krypton might be making a ton more money, that they are able to play video games with Hatsune Miku in it, or see anime where Hatsune Miku might appear for like 5 seconds, or go to concerts like this. Like it's really difficult to create something of that magnificence. At the same time, though, there are like issues of copyright, and there have been a couple case studies that I've looked at of people trying to get money and then conflicts around like what was shared and like what the license was. And so, as I said before, the licenses that appear in the terms of service, the cultural terms of service, are really conflicting in this model. And it's like that's kind of the main focus that I started with, was just looking at how those agreements structure the network that emerges from this model. Like, how are people reacting to each other, but also how do you codify that into like a written law, per se.
Okay, thank you very much, Alex.
Yeah, and if you want to, just email me if you have more questions. I'm not going to be here after the panel, I got to run, but yeah, send me emails and I'll try and answer your questions later.